I'm not gonna lie, I kind of want this cardboard case. This one is a vertical case. You can hold it like this, or you can hold it like this. Ooh. Resona R150. Offset G, this is the G key, and it's offset from the rest of the keys. Hence offset G makes it a lot easier for most people's ring fingers to reach this key. Now, if you have like really long, like Rachmaninoff piano hands, you might actually really not like the offset G. The other thing that the offset G allows you to do is have what's called a split E mechanism. Do you see this little thing coming out? Normally these two keys are actually one piece, but on a split E mechanism, they are separated, they're split. You push down this key and you'll notice that it pushes down this particular little notch. See this notch? It pushes down the notch, which pushes down the key. Because if I were to push down this key here, do you see how there's like a little bit of metal sticking out from the key? It's literally being pushed down by this notch that is controlled by this key. When you play a high E, usually the keys that you are covering is this one, and then you press these two keys down, which usually means that this key is still up if you don't have a split E. Okay, so this is my flute. If I do the same fingering, there, do you notice that key is still up? You see how if I press this, both of them go down? Because mine is not split. Flute makers have found that if this key is down, it makes the high E come out more easily and also a little bit more strong. It's not as resistant as on, for example, my flute. I especially recommend it for my asthmatic folks. Now let's talk about the C sharp trill. A lot of flutes don't have two of these nubbies. This guy only has one nubby. This is actually called a B flat lever. It's one of the three ways that you can play a B flat. This might sound crazy to some of y'all, but on other woodwind instruments, it's even crazier. This is a B plus pinky. If you were to go to a C sharp, you have to go like this. What happens if you trill it? It means you have to go like this. If your balance of the flute isn't absolutely perfect, you're gonna feel like you're constantly almost dropping the flute when doing this. This extra nubby here, we're going to keep wiggling it so you guys can see where it's connected. There is an extra key to your left of the thumb key. This key is not here on my other one. You see that? Nothing. Why is this so important that it's just such a gigantic key? You see how these ones are really tiny? And this one up here is also really tiny. When you play a C sharp, no fingers here, you got no fingers here, and you have your pinky down. That means that the air is venting out of this one, this tiny little key. From what I have read, it causes the sound of the C sharp to be kind of off. It's really hard to tune. It's just very unstable. And it's partially because the tone hole that it's venting out of is so small. One way to play a C sharp really, really in tune is to actually finger a C, but hold down the C sharp trill, and you see how it vents this one, which means that you are now playing a C sharp with a full tone hole venting open. That creates a much more stable sound and much more in tune. There's no other key that I think that it's really connected to. It's just this one piece. People have found in recent years that it's just so useful that it's now, as you can see, becoming standard. Really, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you would have never seen this on a step-up flute. When you trill between B and C sharp, you can also just hold your B, these two, right? And then you just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. So much easier, guys. For that high G, finger a high G, and then you actually position your right index finger on the C sharp trill. You put your middle finger on the first trill key. You go like that. It's kind of like how the offset G kind of became standard after a time too, because again, it's just so much easier. More people can play the flute. It makes the flute more accessible to people. Those are kind of your main mechanism highlights. C sharp trill keys have been around since 1893. Absolutely believe that. It just was not standard until very recently. This is the R150. So now let's open this one. This one must be the R100. Ooh, this is more of your typical texture of flute cases. This is new. Oh, hello. Ooh. As you can see, has all the same bells and whistles. Again, we have offset G. It is a split E mechanism. So if we cover this one, you notice that it will actually just press down this one. These two are not connected together. And then we have our C sharp trill. It's not like the whole thing is silver plated. The lip plate and riser is silver here. So it's going to get you, I'm going to assume, a darker sound, less harsh, a little bit warmer than just full on everything silver plated. Tuned to A = 442. Even though the standard of tuning here in the States is A = 440 Hertz, a lot of flutes are tuned to A = 442 to give you the option of pushing in or pulling out depending on, say, the temperature. So if it is colder in the place that you're playing in, your whole flute is going to be flatter. The way that you can make a flute sharper is by making the entire tube smaller. So you think pan pipes, okay? Smaller tubes give you higher sounds, longer tubes give you lower sounds. It's the same thing on a flute. If you can push in a little bit, then you'll be more in tune if it's colder. It just gives you more leeway. This does mean though that more often than not, you're always going to be pulled out a tiny bit. And this is very, very, very standard. So now we have drawn tone holes. I believe drawn tone holes means that they actually shape the tone holes out of the tube itself. Soldered tone holes, I believe, are the ones that are welded on, basically, soldered on. Pointed key arms. This arm here that connects the key to the rods is pointed. Pointed arms used to be harder to put onto flutes. So it meant that the flute was made better. So you'll see here on all the keys that you're not putting your finger on, there are pointed key arms. This one does not have any pointed key arms. Even though you don't press this one down, it looks exactly like this one. What's happened nowadays, if you guys are wondering why pointed key arms are now pretty standard on step-up model flutes, and even now beginner model flutes are starting to have pointed key arms on it too. It's actually a very convenient way to locate which keys your fingers are supposed to be on. You know, if you're new to the flute, it's like, what? There's so many keys. How do you put only 9 fingers on all of these? But if you look at this one, you can see exactly which ones your fingers go on. You put it here, 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 and then there's these 3 that don't have it. So it's like very obvious where your fingers are supposed to go. So this is actually turning into a really great pedagogical tool for teachers. So many keys, how finger, why confused? Basically, Judith, basically. You'll see that there are also pointed key arms on the foot joint. You put your fingers here, which if you guys are wondering, because I know some of you guys in here don't actually play the flute, you'll see that there's no actual keys under here. All of these keys are actually extensions of these ones and this one. For example, I'll press this one down, you'll see that it opens this one. If I press this one down, it presses that one down. If I press one higher, then it presses 2 of them down. And if I press one higher than that, you have to press this one and both at the same time. Now, you're probably wondering, why is this one independent? Sometimes you want to play a higher note. For example, if you're playing a really high C, you can actually reach your pinky over and press this one down, and it will sort of basically turn your flute into the equivalent of a C foot joint because you're venting out of this key now. This little nubby here is called a gizmo. This is all one piece connected here. So that way you don't have to kind of maneuver your finger and to just press that one down. You could just reach over and there's a very convenient, obvious feeling nub right here that you can press down. Stainless steel springs. So there are springs in here. You see that little needle? That's a spring. There's actually 2 in there. And that's what helps these keys pop up and down. So you'll see this all along the flute. See those little needles in there? Yeah, those are all springs. So in this case, these are stainless steel. The pads are the key pads. So you see the little yellow pads in there? Made out of felt. There are different levels of pads that you can get, and they get more and more expensive. If you want more precision in your sound, the pads are really important. That's all I really know about it. We have here B foot joint. You've got 3 of these here instead of just 2. I will show you my Mateki only has 2. All this means is that this flute, this Mateki, can only go down to a low C. This one can go down to a low B. Now in this day and age, I would say that the low B is starting to become more and more standard in flute repertoire. So it is kind of becoming more and more important to have a low B. It just kind of comes with the step-up flute these days. Why don't they make the B foot standard? Look at how much more metal there is. You see that? There is a concern about the weight of the flute for beginners, because a lot of beginners are kids. You're just gonna be like, ugh. For people who may have some physical limitations that make it hard to hold up a very heavy flute, those people will also really appreciate a C foot joint too. We need to start playing, guys. You guys should see how thick these trill keys are. Look at that, that's thick. Those are some thick trill keys. Getting your new students to really feel where the trill keys are, they can't find it and or they accidentally hit it. So if it's this thick, very typical resistance in the keys. It kind of helps smooth over your technique a little bit more. So first impression is this is a lot more forward playing than I am used to. Looking at this head joint, I'm seeing that the lip plate has a very sharp drop off. It's literally flat here. I'm guessing that helps with kind of redirecting your air into the flute more. We're gonna do some harmonics and then I'm gonna figure out how it feels in my mouth. Then I'm gonna blow on my hand and then I will try to explain to you guys how my airstream feels so that you guys can kind of vicariously experience this at home. I'm having trouble with that. Hear that? That's opening up now, eh? All right, I'm ready. If you hold up your hand to your face, my palm is like on the bottom half of my face. It aims real low and the shape of the airstream is really wide. Normally you would think of your airstream as being like a circle. This airstream is more like that. So it's that shape down here for a low C. And then as you go higher and higher, it just goes up the hand to around there. This is the highest C that I can get. My flute plays more like this, and then it goes higher up like that. When you're at this level of playing, you may not have yet trained the muscles here to do these tiny movements to shape the airstream. This head joint allows you to have a much wider airstream, and you can shoot all the way down. So all those things that I normally tell my students, like, hey, you're stuffing the air into the flute, don't do that. This flute would allow you to do it. Those really high notes, I am pushing from the front of my mouth. For most head joints, if you want to control the shape of the airstream at a high air pressure for high notes, you have to blow from further back in the mouth. Now, I do notice that as a teacher, this is one of the hardest things to teach students. This is absolutely designed for developing students. Dynamics, the bigger the cross-section of your airstream, the more air you're putting in as a result, the louder it's gonna be. The smaller the cross-section of your airstream is, and thus the less air that you're putting in, the softer it will be. The tone color aspect of it is changing kind of the shape of the airstream. If you want a really thick sound, you're gonna want to take your base shape of your Airstream and then you're gonna want to squash it down and flat and wide. To get the hollow sound, what you do is you take your base shape and then you push it this way. So what I'm going to guess, if I get the hollow sound, I'm actually going to get something closer to the shape of my Airstream on my flute. So it's going to be like my normal way of playing, but it's going to come out hollow. Okay, this thing can take a lot. Woo, you notice it's not cracking? Oh, okay, this one will crack high. If you're one that just stuffs air into the flute, this will take it. We're gonna now make it much softer. It's still pretty loud. Let's try and get softer. You can get soft, but not crazy soft. This isn't going to be a problem for beginner to beginner intermediate students because you're really not going to be playing a lot of really soft things at that level. This will be very interesting to see if the upgrades to the head joints as we upgrade through today, if that will yield that kind of like larger kind of palette of dynamics and tone color. So now we're going to go for like a really rich tone. So we're going to take our Airstream, okay? And then we're going to go. As expected, the bass sound of this is already really rich. So you can't really go that much richer. You can go more though. Let's do higher one. Yeah, you notice that? Like I can't get that much richer because the base shape of it is already super rich. So now let's do hollow. I knew it. I'm actually playing closer to how I play on my flute, that more kind of circular Airstream. So I don't have to do an extreme blob face for this. So this would explain why if you try this flute and you can only get that hollow sound, it could be because your base shape of your Airstream is more circular. Oh, it's a very sweet sound. Oh, that sounds good with that theme. We gotta run a few scales so we can test out the mechanism. We'll test out articulation. The mechanism is designed to smooth out your technique for you. So again, very good for beginner, intermediate flutists. Let's try out these thick trill keys. Very bouncy. I like it. Very bouncy. Usually this one is like kind of floppy. This is the C-sharp trill. A little bit of resistance. Very good for beginner and intermediate flutists. Slightly less bouncy on the B flat lever, but has that same resistance. Let's try the gizmo. Definitely helps with the tuning. You hear that? Also very thick, very high and very thick. So again, for beginner and intermediate players, very easy for you to find it and not accidentally hit it. I like that the B flat lever and the C sharp trill are just, at least for my hands, they're just far away enough from each other that they're very distinct, but they're not so far away from each other that you feel like you're reaching to the moon to get to the C sharp trill. Let's do E, the split E. You hear how like ringing that is? I think that's the split E. Let's do some articulation. Let's try it on the hand first. I'm going to guess between my teeth, probably. Maybe not. Ooh, this is very interesting. Ooh, even though it's very forward in the mouth, the tonguing is actually not. What you should really feel on your hand is like the equivalent of blowing a consistent Airstream on your hand, but there's just tiny gaps. It shouldn't feel like an extra burst of air every time you tongue. It should not feel like every time you start the tongue that it spreads out. It should literally just feel like a constant airstream, but with gaps in it. If you do that on your hand, you might find something similar to me, which is that ironically, even though it's very forward playing, because it's angled so far down, something to do with that angle is making it so that you can actually tongue further back in the mouth, which is a lot more comfortable for most beginners and intermediate players. For me, it's like right behind my front teeth. Now try the E-Bear. Yeah, it's evening out the technique for me. My tongue also doesn't have to move so much. I think it's because the angle is so much consistently down here. It's making it so that you can actually tongue in relatively the same place, and it sounds kind of the same. Very good for beginners and intermediates, because the idea of having to move your tongue around, forward and back, it's a very difficult thing to teach. Yeah, you don't have to move your tongue around. Like, I'm moving my tongue just a little bit to go up into the high ones, but not that much. Let's try double tonguing. Okay, double tonguing is gonna feel really forward. Ah, did you hear that? On the way down, it sounded better, because I was starting to get a feel of exactly where it is. Okay, double tonguing is interesting on this one. It's the same idea where it's kind of sitting in the same place no matter where you go, high or low, but the K part of your double tongue has to be really far forward, so it's also against the roof of the mouth. If this is the roof of your mouth, your tongue is going like this. So think tick, 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 where the K is against the roof of your mouth. You and I are different people, so it's gonna, manifest a little differently. You don't have to move the tongue back and forth, but you do have to double tongue properly, which is not to go into your throat. This would make a great flute to introduce double tonguing on. This is a great teaching tool. So this next flute is a bit of an upgrade. This is the Burkart Resona R150. So we have now a sterling silver Resona head joint. So now the entire head joint is silver. I can see it in real life. I hope you guys can too. But do you guys notice that this one that I'm shaking around is a wee bit darker in color than this one? Also, you'll notice that the head joint, the lip plate doesn't taper off as much as this one does. Rounded here, whereas this one has a very sharp drop off. This is the one that we're playing right now. My guess is that this is going to be a lot more of a standard feel in terms of the shape of the airstream, how you angle the airstream. If you go to the bottom link, you'll see that you have the option of getting a 14K riser, which is this one that we will look at later. There's a few other options in there too. The body is still silver plated mechanism, right? A equals 442, we talked about that earlier. Drawn tone hulls, pointed key irons, we talked about all of that. Stainless steel springs. You notice that it says Resona pads instead of felt pads. I'm going to guess that this is kind of a higher quality. Again, B foot joint, offset G, split E mechanism, C sharp trill. We've got all those goodies on here. Oh, that's so interesting. Wait a second. They made it so that this guy is a little higher. You see that? It's a little higher and it's a little bit more off to the side, which means that they now have to put a tiny little piece of felt in here to pad it against the G offset rod. That's so cool. The other one is not like this. It's more kind of compact and it's all the way over. It's not touching the offset G rod at all. You see that? It's next to it. The trill keys are smaller. They're pretty similar. I would say that mine is just a hair smaller. This is actually built to be a little bit more standard. You would never see this from the specs though. I was just looking to see if there's anything different here. This one is very tall. You see that gizmo? Holy crap, that's very, very tall. We've now upgraded to a silver head joint. Typically at this point, you're probably starting to play things like the Mozart Concerto in D, G. You might be starting to play the Chaminade Concertino. Mechanism is actually bouncier too. It's not as resistant as the R100. So we'll do harmonics. Definitely more back playing now. Okay, this is a lot more traditional. All right. Yeah, this is very traditional. This is very, very traditional. It even has a traditional one harmonic that breaks the pattern. The Airstream is no longer this kind of like this sort of shape. It's more circular. As you go higher and higher, it gets wider and wider. You can really feel the low note is sitting more forward in the mouth, high note sitting further back. Because the higher you go, the more wide the Airstream is, it compensates for the fact that a lot of times when you are still a developing student, you're still training your muscles. It is very hard to focus your Airstream down the higher your air pressure is. So this head joint allows you to have a very spread Airstream even as you're going higher, but you are doing the next step, which is learning how to move it forward and back in your mouth. The one harmonic that breaks the pattern is not one that you will have to worry about too much. It is the seventh harmonic, the one that sounds as a B flat. Suddenly you have to play really forward to get it out, and then you have to go back again for the really high C. They've designed this so that the strong part of the flute is kind of the general range that you will be playing in. I think that's so cool. Now let's talk about where on your hand your Airstream is going. So it starts out more circular, and then it's just going wider and wider and wider, just a tiny bit higher. The point where it breaks the pattern for the B flat, it shoots down here. So the one that broke the pattern broke it back to what it was on the R100. So if you straight upgraded from the R100, it would be very easy for you to find it. Tone, color, and dynamics. Now, because our high notes are already like this, I think even if we just play like this, it'll sound hollow. For our low notes, we have a little bit more leeway. So I'm gonna guess we have more color palette range now. So maybe our low notes, we can get them both thicker, reedier, richer, and we can get them more hollow. Oh, ooh, nice hollow sound. Yeah, you hear that? You hear that? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to be able to get that soft. You can get a little thicker. The hollow is very sweet. I think that's the Resona sound. Yeah, it can take a lot. You have larger range, but it does take more control to get it. So you do literally have to be more advanced to be able to do that here. Ooh. The bass Airstream is so wide on those high notes. If you just have like a normal Airstream shape, that hollow sound, man. Play something with the fancy trill key. The only way that they can make it feel more in line with the B flat lever is if they pushed it out this way, which is why it's touching the offset G rod now. Usually the C sharp trill key feels like it's like a step up higher. Some people like it higher, some people like it lower. It kind of depends on your hand. We gotta keep going. Some key work. Can you guys actually hear that it's more bouncy than the R100? There's more pop to the sound. That could be the pads too. There's a bit of resistance on this one. I would say that's more typical. So that's B flat lever. This one is C sharp trill. It's bouncy, but with a little bit of resistance. These feel very traditional. They're not super light, but they're bouncy. And that's what you want for trill keys. Ooh, that gizmo is like really out to play. Yeah, definitely affects the tuning there. Oh, let's try a split E. Yeah, you hear that? Very little resistance. Articulation. I think because the Airstream goes so wide for the high notes, you don't have to go as far back in your mouth. So there is some movement. This is very good for introducing the idea of moving your tongue back and forth a little bit, but not too much. That's nice. It's where the teeth meets your gums. That's where my tongue is hitting for the low F. My highest F there was only I would say a centimeter back. So you're not moving your tongue very much at all, but it does introduce the idea of moving your tongue back and forth. I think it's because you don't have to move the start of your airstream so far back in your mouth in order to concentrate the airstream down, right? You can leave it nice and spread and it still responds really well. Both the R100 and the R150 will make interval jumps very easy for you. As you upgrade, it actually introduces more and more advanced techniques. Let's do double tonguing, probably very forward double tonguing, but it follows that single tonguing pattern. Yeah, you're not double tonguing like this. You're double tonguing like this. But the whole thing does move back a tiny bit as you go really high and then moves back forward again as you go low. Let's do one more upgrade. This head joint is the first one that we showed you at the beginning of this stream, this guy. The difference between this head joint and the one I just played is the risers. That is not a trick of the light. Do you see how it's actually gold inside? It's 14 karat gold in there, and it's not just the lining, it's literally a tube of metal. Gold tends to make everything a little bit more forward playing. It also tends to mellow out the sound quite a bit. Harmonics, real quick. I'm gonna guess it's more forward. Yep. You know how I said that gold like rounds out your sound? It's literally more round, which makes me realize why I play gold well is because my natural airstream is round. The lowest note is actually a very thin, small airstream. It's like really round. And I just noticed that it's easier to make a round shape of the cross section of your airstream by doing it further forward in your mouth. And then as you get higher and higher, it does follow the same pattern where it kind of widens out, but it doesn't widen out as much as on the silver. It's still relatively kind of more oblong round like this. That is a ridiculously rich sound for like an airstream that's like this. So for a smaller person like me, this is very comfortable. I don't feel like I'm going into the flute. Tone, color, dynamic stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna guess we can go pretty loud. That's what I'm gonna guess, right? Because the bass airstream is really small. It means that you can likely push a lot of air into it, make it really big. Yeah, you can go pretty rich with this, but it's still mellow. It doesn't have like that edge that the silver one has. You guys notice that? I'm going pretty extreme fishy face to get that taller, narrower airstream. May not be as easy to get the hollow sound, but possible. It's already naturally quite rich. So I'm trying to go richer and it's not really giving it to me. It is, but a little bit. As expected, because the base shape of the airstream higher up is wider. So it's going to be harder to get a richer sound out there because you have to make it even wider, right? But you notice how easy it is to get a nice hollow sound up there. Essentially, what this is good at then is your low notes are naturally thicker and richer, which is what most people want. And your high notes are naturally hollower, shimmerier, more gentle, more dainty, more sing-songy. Let's do loud and soft now. Okay, you can beef it up for the low ones because the airstream is naturally a smaller one, so you can really go big. Resona is geared for smaller hands. That would explain why I'm comfortable on it. Okay, pretty hard to make it really soft down there, but it is very responsive if you have the muscle control for it. If you don't have that muscle control, this is something that you can learn on this flute. You hear how soft you can get up there? Man, that's nice. Bass shape up higher is wider. So going down to just even a little bit smaller will immediately yield a really nice shimmery tone. Essentially is a great introduction to tone color palettes. Articulation. Okay, so probably further forward in the mouth, which means I'm probably going to be tonguing against my teeth now. I'm probably still going to go a little bit further back, but I'm going to guess that I only need to go as far back as like a little bit behind my teeth. Yeah, that's straight up against the back of my teeth. Yeah, in terms of the range of motion, it's the same as the silver. Double tonguing is probably going to be very forward, almost like a slow flutter. Exactly what I thought it was going to be. It's very, very forward double tonguing. I'm imagining the K part of the double tongue hitting like a centimeter back from where your T is. That's kind of how far forward it is. So that might be a challenge. If you do learn your double tonguing like that, you can go really fast. I have recently found out that this is how people do extremely ridiculously fast double tongues. It's the front of your tongue that's kind of flicking up and down like this. I feel like all of these head joints, both of these flutes, really lend themselves well to that really sweet sound. You know that flute sound that everyone wants to sound like? This can help you experience that at a beginner and intermediate level. All right, guys, as you can see, I finished cleaning up. Thank you so much for joining, everyone, and thank you again to the Flute Center of New York for sponsoring today's live stream. They are also sponsoring tomorrow's practice session on these flutes and this head joint over on my Twitch channel here, twitch.tv/justanotherflautist. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.